Hi, good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Quinn Gardner. I'm the Deputy Director of Emergency Management for the City of San Rafael. Today we're holding one of many public meetings, community meetings to chat about Phase 3 in our safe parking program that is designed to improve and assure evacuation routes, access, egress, as well as trying to meet a lot of other conditions and criteria that we're going to talk about today. So just a little bit of groundkeeping before we dive into the meeting. This is being recorded so that folks that aren't able to make this meeting or another meeting can watch it at their convenience. We will take questions, but we're going to ask that we hold questions until the end of the meeting, and we'll provide two question opportunities, one that's recorded and one that after we turn off the recording, in case anyone feels more comfortable asking questions off the record or off the recording, if you will. And all of our staff remain available to answer any questions, of course, offline after these meetings as well. So with that, we'd ask everyone to stay muted as we go through this. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kate to talk a little bit more about the program. And thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Anderson. I'm the Wildfire Program Manager here at City of San Rafael. Want to echo what Quinn just said. Thank you so much for joining, and we will get this kicked off. Next slide, Quinn. So quick agenda, kind of our roadmap for today, pun intended. We're going to go over some background of our safe parking project, where we started with a pilot project, as we do with most larger initiatives that we have, the outreach associated with this project and in general in our program. We'll go through some existing parking rules and standards, our evaluation process for this project, public works considerations and other criteria, and we'll end with some general Q&A. Next slide. So this slide is to really show you kind of the timeline of our wildfire initiatives and prevention efforts. Starting in 2007, that's when we really got serious about this work and started to amend our codes to reflect that. But I want to jump ahead to 2021 to really focus on the evacuation, safety, and responder access issues that we have there at the city, especially in hilly, narrow neighborhoods, which is the subject of this project. And in 2021, we amended our municipal code to include parking restrictions in those narrow, hilly neighborhoods. And then with that, we dove right into a pilot project focusing on Lincoln Hill, which incorporates all of those things that I just mentioned. And then working after that pilot project, we've amended our process. We've learned a few things, and we're starting to move throughout the city. That's been going on in 2022 and into this third phase that we're in now. Next slide, Quinn. Outreach is the cornerstone of all of our citywide initiatives. All this work impacts all of you in the city as a whole. So the big piece of outreach that I really want to highlight here is our wildfire action plan. This is the foundation of most of the work that we're doing. And this took multiple years, a citizen oversight advisory committee, multiple workshops, and it's really the result of what the community told us that they want and how we've been able to balance what we're able to do. So these, included dozens of HOA, neighborhood association, community-wide and city council meetings with the ongoing use of social media, city websites, Nextdoor, and meetings like this. As we move through different phases of the project, we want to invite everybody to learn what's going on as a whole, and then what we'll be seeing in each of our neighborhoods. Next slide, Quinn. We started with our pilot project. A pilot project is really a subset of a larger initiative that we have, where we can really see how to move through a project, how it's received, what type of outreach we need to do, and how to engage with our community. Um, Lincoln Hill is the perfect place to do this for us. So we had a lot of outreach, community walks, which I want to open up to every neighborhood that we'll be moving into in phase 3. We can talk about that when we get to Q&A. And this type of project also really works synergistically with our roadside vegetation management. So any kind of evacuation route improvements include both the vegetation on the side of the road, which may open up more opportunities for us to include parking or clarify parking or increase visibility for first responders and for community members in an evacuation. This includes a lot, oh, and then getting into kind of the focus of why we're doing this. We have a longstanding parking rule of 6 feet from center. And what we found, and in talks with the community, is that this is confusing, both for folks to understand. If there's no center line on a road, Dominican Drive, an example of where there's center lines, and then we move into areas where there's not center lines. And it can get confusing to what exactly that means, judging that distance. It's hard to enforce. And it's been in place for decades, but our cars are getting bigger. Parking habits have remained unchanged in that time. So we're starting to see issues with larger cars, streets are the same width, and we're moving towards ways to clarify that better for everybody. Next slide. Uh, there are areas where we can have off-road parking, but that gets into kind of this confusing area where especially if we don't have a center line, we can already see that when we have wheels on the road, if we're really judging where the middle of that road is, we're not 6 feet from center. And so it's not clear, it's hard to understand, and unless you've built your own off-street parking into the right of way or you have a designated driveway, it's not easy to understand that and comply with the rules. And it makes, you know, uh, evacuation and everyday navigation difficult at times. So I'm going to hand this over to Calvin to really get into what this means on the ground moving forward.
Hello, everyone. I'm Calvin Schroeder with the City of San Rafael Fire Department. I'm a wildfire mitigation specialist. And here are some of the parking restriction options that we provided to the roadways that we looked at. So some of those are parking boxes. Those are areas that are designated for illegal parking, designated by a white line or white box. Red curbing, as typical, these are near fire hydrants, on the apexes of curbs, and is where people cannot park. No parking signs can take the place of red curbs where there may not be curbs available or for large stretches of roadway. No parking on one side of the roadway or the other. So for on more narrow roadways that we can allow parking on one side of the roadway, that remains an option. No parking on the entirety of the street, and then shoulder striping. And shoulder striping are those white lines you'll sometimes see on the edges of roadways, and that designates the lanes of travel. Next slide, please. So one of the ways we determined which roadways would receive treatment were to interview fire crews. Our operations are out there every day, and here's a video of why that's so important, of how difficult it can be. So you can see there, the captain's having to direct the truck around these parked vehicles. It's smushed in there. It creates a slow response, and it's unsafe.
Sorry, Coven, now I have to figure out how to get back to the deck. There we go.
So there we go. So that's why, the 6 foot from, yeah, so here we go. So measuring road width. So the city has GIS data for all the road widths throughout the city. And in areas where it wasn't as clear or we want to be sure where parking couldn't be, we were actually able to go out there and physically measure it. In this case, using PVC pipes, measuring sticks, what have you. We were able to determine areas where parking couldn't be, and really trying to maximize where legal, safe parking could occur. So see, these are some of the traffic laws and minimum requirements. So legal roadway is 11 feet for a travel lane, and optimally this is 12 feet because the size of an engine is a minimum 10 feet wide, and they do require approximately 2 feet to be able to bring out ladders to take out to connect hoses and to be able to successfully operate. So realistically, we're looking at 12 feet for a lane that can accommodate a fire engine. A parking box or parking spot width must be at least 7 feet wide. There are also rules that pertain to turning radius, and this is all on existing roadways. All new roads in California are required to be at least 20 feet wide. Here's a good graphic of what that looks like. This is predominantly applicable to long straight of ways where parking can be accommodated on both sides for larger roads. So this is a good indicator of where it can and can't occur. So as you can see, that access road, that less than 20 feet, if you look at your 12 feet for an engine and that 7-foot minimum distance for a parking box, you're right there at that 19 feet. So that's the bare minimum. So here we have some graphics for why those additional feet are required and why that additional space is necessary for engines to operate. Again, that's their ladders being loaded onto the engine there on the left-hand side, and the SCBA containers on the right-hand picture. So there's a lot of important equipment that requires additional space to be available. So we were able to go out onto some of these roadways and mark, and after measuring, we're able to mark them and determine which side of the road could accommodate parking, which sides couldn't. If parking could be accommodated, we did work to maximize that and maximize safety through having vehicles facing the exit, through parking being available on this side of the sidewalk, and trying to maximize that safe available parking. So the considerations that we took in during this process were roadway visibility, the width of the roadway, so how wide it is, the access and egress of vehicles, including emergency vehicles, vegetation that might be on the side of the roadway, traffic patterns, so more highly and less highly used roadways, where the evacuation route might lead to, and so also the pedestrian safety, existing roadway infrastructure, and what have you. So here's a map indicating where some of those parking changes will be in this phase of the parking program. In the Bret Harte neighborhood, all this information is available on our webpage for you to be able to peruse. But in the Bret Harte neighborhood, this is where we're going to be applying the restriction type, and that restriction type is basically what the change will be, and the marking type is how we're going to designate that. So for instance, in Bret Harte, on Bret Harte Road, we want people to park in designated areas. So we're going to have sections of white striping or curb striping to identify where the travel lane is and where it is not. Here in Fair Hills, you can see that there's some additional areas, and they have different marking types and different restrictions, and those all apply to be the most consistent with our goals, and that will have the least impact on residents and the most impact on allowing for emergency access and egress. Similar with Gerstle Park, we're going to be implementing these changes there, Picnic Valley, and there'll be a few others. So these are all available on the webpage.
Yeah. And Kevin, I think one point, just as the last slide that Quinn had, if we could pull that up real quick, we have additional case-by-case areas, and these could be new implementation where we haven't done work before, but we see some other areas in the Lincoln Hill neighborhood, Prospect, Chula Vista, and Villa Ave. And these are areas where, I mentioned our pilot is really where we get to see kind of how a project works and where we might need to do things differently or amend things. We're doing just that. So we're adapting as we go. We've learned a lot over the years, and we will be making changes as appropriate and as necessary moving forward as well. And with that, we can end and get into all the questions I'm sure that you have for us.
Thanks, Kate. And before we dive into questions, I just want to kind of summarize a lot of what Kate and Calvin have talked about and where this program kind of started from and came from, which was ultimately concerns following a lot of really significant and deadly fires and what we were seeing in terms of challenges evacuating, but also in terms of how we were seeing our community change. And that's everything from the additions of ADUs, from adult children moving back in with parents, increasing the vehicle loads within households, garages converting to storage space rather than places for vehicles. And so we've seen this increase, larger vehicles, as Kate mentioned, this increased congestion on the roadways. Combined with the confusion around our existing laws. So our real goal with all of this ultimately is to clarify existing laws. And in some cases, we're creating exceptions to those. And the parking boxes are a perfect example where by pure 6 feet from center rule, there should be no parking on San Rafael Lincoln Hill on the majority of that, all of those streets as an example. But we realize that's not realistic for folks for all the reasons I mentioned. So we go through and we try to be strategic about where we can find space for safe parking that essentially becomes an exception to our rules. And that's the same process we're following across the city, just implementing different tools, because in some cases, it's not about parking boxes. It's just about making sure the curbs or the turning areas stay clear. And with that, we can kind of navigate everything else successfully. So it is a really nuanced approach where we're looking at a lot of things, as well as just ease of understanding, ease to enforce, to make sure that anyone coming into any community understands where they can and cannot park, so that that end result is assuring we have safe traffic flow, safe pedestrian traffic, et cetera. So I'm going to leave the recording on first and see if anyone has questions that they want to ask as part of the recording, and then I will stop the recording in case people prefer to ask any questions offline. You can unmute or raise hands if you have any questions.
Hey, I've got a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
Hey there. Yeah, my name's Todd Moore. I live over on Martins Boulevard, which for anybody who's familiar with it, very narrow road, windy. We've got all sorts of parking problems. So I appreciate this effort. I guess I'm curious, when I looked at the list, it said that there was going to be some white striping and signs done. So I'm just kind of curious, is there a map somewhere that shows us kind of where that white striping is going to take place that we can look at, or do we just kind of wait to see what happens? And then also, can you elaborate a little bit, if there's a white stripe, what's the rule? Is it basically that tires have to be on one side of it or within a distance? I'm just curious what the logistics are.
Yeah, Kelvin can touch a little bit more on the available maps and the markings that have been put out. The idea with the white stripes is essentially designating the travel lane. And so within the travel lane, and that was a recommendation that came directly from our traffic engineer, within the travel lane, you can't park because that's a roadway. And so then you're kind of creating maybe a little bit, maybe you're stealing a foot or two of shoulder where you have areas that have a lot of off-street parking, like one of those images we saw before. So you're clear about is a travel lane and what doesn't. And Calvin, do you want to elaborate a little bit about maps and markings?
Absolutely. So on Martins Boulevard specifically, it's from the very beginning to the very end. We're going to be installing those white stripes to really designate where that off-street parking is and is not. So realistically, that street is unsafe to have people parking on the pavement in the travel lanes. So there we designated areas for that white striping. And at the very end, that signage aspect is going to be a no parking sign at the transition zone from Southern Heights to Martins. So that's the only sign that will be installed there, with the very end just saying no parking at that curve. There will still be parking just below that on Martins for people who have historically parked. It's a very wide outcropping there where people will be able to continue to legally park there. So there is a map available on the web page. It's a little bit blown out, but if you do go The areas where those white stripes will be, you can, if you do look on the roadway, they are indicated in orange, with orange little L's that are on the roadway itself. So that'll indicate where some of those white stripes will go. Although everything is subject to some change pending the what have you, the real world differences.
Got it. So if I hear you correctly, where there's white stripes, it'll basically be on both sides of the road. So it'll be pretty clearly indicating where the driving lane is.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I see Pete has a question.
It's not really a question. Thank you for doing this. A couple of years ago, we went through this with the neighborhood on Dominican Drive. Just want to point out two things. On the even side of Dominican Drive, it's all sidewalk. On the uneven side, which is my side, or there is no sidewalk. You can't even, in some places, get out of a car. So a couple of years ago, I pointed out that there's a liability for the city if they force people to get out, whether there's a hill or they can't get out if they have a wheelchair or infirm or disabled. That's why sidewalks were built. So that was changed, and apparently in this presentation, or what was put out, is the old proposal. The new proposal is to have the opposite side painted. The other thing is, in terms of what you're not taking into account, is that I'm a retired, oh, by the way, I'm a retired chief of police here in the county, and I've been here 38 years. The other thing is that you have an 18-inch away from the curb, you can be up to 18 inches. So actually, and I've seen it on Dominican Drive that, and other streets too, that if you've got two, let's say, delivery trucks that are parked next to each other, you can't even get through. If they're parked legally 18 inches from the curb, there's no center line. So that has to be taken into consideration also as the parking law that deals with the 18-inch
Yeah.
allowance.
Thanks, Pete. Those are two great points. I'll start with your latter. One of the really big benefits to the roadway striping and the parking boxes is it really does force people to hug the curb. Because that is something that we've seen is where people, if you're perfectly parked against the curb, you might be able to squeeze a spot in there and you're a smaller vehicle. But then you put a larger vehicle that's parked 18 to 20 inches, right? And again, who's out there with that tape measure? And that's where we get into the difficult piece of enforcement, which is why we're trying to find the simplest ways that really can. And so part of what we're looking at is when we look at these different solutions is not just what makes it clear where people can't park, but that in places people can, to make sure they're doing it as safely as possible and hugging that curb. And your point about the sidewalks is well taken, and I know we spoke offline about that. And there's a lot of it's a great example of and there's a few other streets in the city we've looked at this too, where maybe the sidewalks on one side, but parking on that side is actually facing away from the evacuation route. And so then we're in this position of making a decision about, do we want all the vehicles parked so they have to turn around to evacuate, or do we want people parking on the side with the sidewalk? And in some cases, that's where parking boxes provide a good alternative because we can put them in different places and kind of navigate things. But it just points out the variety of nuances and complications and factors trying to consider and weigh, and all are considered, and we try to come up with the best solution for given neighborhoods. And in some cases, one thing has to give or take in way of another benefit. So I appreciate you pointing both those things out.
Yeah, I'm glad you're doing it. And I know the neighborhood is also glad, particularly with the inability for fire rigs to get through. It's that's a frightening thought. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, I'm going to stop the recording and thank everyone, and anyone watching this later, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And then once I stop the recording, if there's any other questions.
Yeah, I had a question. This is Susan, and
Sure.
I'm on Dominican Drive too. So just so I understand, for Dominican Drive, your plan is to paint the red curb on the, not the sidewalk part, but the other side. Is that correct?
But I can take that one.
Okay.
Yes, so on the opposite side of the sidewalks at the apexes of the corners. So that will be, yeah, so most of them will be done except the very, very end of the roadway. Past Aquinas, there's one very sharp corner, and that one will interact with the sidewalk, but there's no way that a rig could get around that with parking on that sidewalk side, so there will be no parking there.
So you're saying you're only going, if I understand correctly, you're only putting the red curb on on the corners or the whole way down the street?
The corners.
Because
With
that doesn't solve the problem with cars parked on both sides of the road and the fire trucks won't be able to get through.
So the street is one of those streets that and accommodate legal parking on both sides with enough width for an engine to go through. So that's been evaluated, and that's why these curves are really important to target, is because that's a choke point. That's where it requires a little bit of additional space on either side. So the curves are definitely the most important, and those are the first ones to be regulated. And of course, it can always be looked at again, but that's why that was the decision that was made.
And I
Um,
would just add quickly to what Calvin mentioned. We're not talking about like the curb is a very extensive version of the curb. It's not just like a couple feet on the curb. It's a pretty wide curb, and that's what we do in a lot of different areas, because when we can kind of create straightaways where people have the visibility and might be able to kind of navigate. And I do this on my own personal street in a different city, right? Like neighborhoods can be congested, but as long as you have enough kind of wiggle room to navigate around if you have traffic coming both ways. But around curves, that's obviously really dangerous and challenging. But there's enough intermittent. What it'll ultimately do is create intermittent parking along the entire street that will still provide, even if cars were on both sides at the exact spot, like Calvin mentioned, the width is there technically. It's not what we want to see the whole length of the road, because that could impact operations and all sorts of things. But and it is one of those things too, like Kelvin mentioned, and like you saw on that last slide, is if we get this all in and 6 months go and it's like, you know what, this is still a challenge. This is a spot that's really problematic. We can go reevaluate, and there's nothing that stops us from adding additional red paint, parking boxes, stripings, etc. Down the road.
i- if I could follow on with what Sue said, please. Um, there's more to it than just fire. And what we have is we have children on the street. Now, every time you have a car parked, or at least on Dominican Drive, opposite each other, we're not just talking delivery truck, we're talking cars. A child has to go around it, through it, and it's a danger to children who are riding their bikes. That can be mitigated by painting one side, and I'm impacted by that because I'm saying paint in front of my house, so there would be no more parking in front of my house. I'm more concerned. Yeah, you can navigate your way around when you're driving. The problem is that you're gonna have to go over, stop, let another car through. If you painted all of my side, which is the odd numbered side, you wouldn't have that problem of having to circumnavigate through Dominican Drive. And we have a lot of kids riding their bikes, and this is a safety issue too. It's not just fire. Uh, my suggestion is, since you have, and there's a liability aspect to the city too. If they can mitigate a hazard and don't do it, and they know it's a hazard, then you're liable as a city. So it's much more than just fire.
It sounds like what might be worthwhile, and we're doing this in a couple other areas, is to set a specific neighborhood visit, where Calvin or myself can come out and find a time that works with the neighbors and see if an engine can come through at the same time, and we can talk through and ground truth some of the options. And I think one of the challenges that we're constantly trying to weigh is everything you're saying, Pete, around safety, fully agree with, and yet we have a very real community need for parking in a variety of reasons. And so we're just trying to constantly balance that and figure out where we can retain parking. But at the end of the day, streets are public thoroughfares and right of ways that are open to everybody and not designed to be parking lots. And so
Well, this
certainly open to exploring more restrictive options
I appreciate
if
that.
it's
I
warranted.
appreciate that and about getting together. What I am saying is the traffic flow would be eased rather than having to navigate when a car is oncoming. When you only have a limited amount of space, you've got children on bicycles who, naturally don't always pay as much attention. So in doing this, you can solve more than just the problem of a fire rig or a UPS truck or anything else getting
Sure.
through. So I would suggest that the entire side, my side, the uneven numbered side, be painted. And that way you'd still have the same, matter of fact, you'd have better flow of traffic. And I'm taking this from a law enforcement, from a traffic side, not just I've
Sure.
in
No,
the
I
business
understand.
for 35 years, so this is what I do or did. So,
No, certainly understand the perspective and
yeah,
just for the sake of wanting to um make sure we'd have other opinions from the neighborhood and things like that there and have discussions. But I hear
well,
you.
I
I'm not
must say
saying
that we've been through this 2 years ago, and we had an entire discussion, and the entire neighborhood was online, and now it's back to question again. And it was agreed on by fire that the odd side would be painted, the even side would remain where the sidewalks are, would not be painted. So it was
no,
agreed upon 2 years ago. So we're going through it again.
well, we'll look at it. We've had some change in traffic engineers and internal staff and things like that.
Mhm.
And just for the sake of wanting to make sure we keep a, citywide meeting a little more generic and open to other things
Sure.
around anything.
Sure.
But happy to discuss that particular site
And if I
more
could be
offline.
included in that, I would be appreciated. Would very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. And I'm
Yeah,
gonna go
and
ahead and
just
stop that
can I
recording.
Can I say one thing, Susan? Yeah, just yesterday we had two cars parked on either side. And as you guys know, cars sometimes don't park right next to the curb. So it was pretty tough for just me to get through in a regular car. So I think that would be advantageous for you guys to come visit and see
Okay,
for yourself.
great. Thank you for that feedback. And I'm gonna stop that recording now. And then I